Very much appreciate that, Bryce, and am honored to be here, like most speakers are. It has been almost 30 years since I was the keynote speaker in front of a FFA banquet. So my pleasure to be here. Plus, I really appreciate the fact that the officer team really went out on a limb to invite me here as a machinery guy, given the number of rod keys that are on this officer team. So thank you for honoring me with this, and appreciate the hospitality from the Rodkey family and being competitors with one another. So forgive me for being a little nervous. Last time I stood in front of a group like this, I was at my home chapter. I was a state officer my senior year in high school, and talked to the group about how the first time I had told my dad that I loved him, which was kind of an unusual thing in our family. I grew up in Northwest Ohio on a family farm, like Bryson mentioned, but you know, I knew my parents loved me. We never talked about it. So I was at National Convention that summer before I started my senior year as a state FFA officer, and one of the keynote speakers had encouraged us to call our parents and tell them that we loved them. So I did that evening at the request of that keynote speaker, and I got on the phone with my dad, and I said, "Hey, Dad, I love you." He said, "Okay." Which sounds really funny right now, but as a 17-year-old young man, that was pretty impactful. It hurt to not have my dad say "I love you" back. But so that was kind of my keynote speech for that night, to talk about being open with our feelings. And my dad wasn't very happy with me at the end of that banquet. So hopefully this goes better. A couple of topics I want to talk about tonight. As I thought about, okay, who do I have in the crowd, and how do I convey a message that would be meaningful for everybody? So two topics I want to talk about tonight. One is grit, and another is a concept I talk about. I call it the blue chip theory of interaction management. So we'll get into both of those here in a little bit. So how many people listen to TED Talks? Anybody listen to TED Talks online? So I see a few hands go up. I'm not a big reader, so for me, TED Talks are awesome. I get to listen to them. I'm a visual, auditory learner, but I'm not a big reader. So I came across this TED Talk, and the lady who was giving this talk, her name is Angela Lee Duckworth. So has anybody seen her TED Talk on grit? Anybody seen that one? A couple people have seen that. So her story is that she was a management consultant who decided to leave that job and become a teacher. And as a teacher, she discovered that IQ wasn't necessarily the key indicator for the success of the students in her classes. It was this term she called grit. So after a few years and a little bit of frustration as a teacher, she left that profession to become a psychologist so she could study this grit. So one of the reasons why this particular TED Talk stuck out with me was one of the places they went to study this new phenomena they call grit, was at West Point, and the success that certain cadets had over others. And that and the National Spelling Bee were the two that she mentioned, but I'm sure they studied other places. So that particular talk stuck out to me. And she spoke about grit as if it was a new concept, which astounded me. She also spoke about at the very end of her presentation about how we know very little about how to develop grit, which again astounded me. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that with the group. I think I'm probably talking to a group of people who probably have a fair amount of grit here. If you are agriculturalists, then you probably have some grit in you. But let's just talk about that. I'm nothing special, okay? I graduated from the academy. I'm very proud of that. People know what West Point is? So, okay, some of the younger generations don't know, they haven't studied it, or don't know what the academy is like. So, for those of you who don't, West Point was founded in 1802, signed in by Thomas Jefferson, and has been the military academy, the Army Academy for the country since the last couple hundred years. So, had more graduates from West Point that have become President of the United States than any other institution. Names like Robert E. Lee and Ulysses Grant, Eisenhower, in more recent history, Schwarzkopf. So some of those great generals graduated from the academy. Not that it's the only place that generates great generals, but they have kind of developed it into a science on how to create leaders. So it's particularly for the Army. So I'm very honored to have graduated from that institution. I feel like I learned quite a bit from going to school there. And I do feel like even growing up on a farm, there was some grit that was developed in me by going to that academy. So I don't want to talk down to people or preach, but I guess I'll share some of the things that I learned over the years, and hopefully it's impactful for you and helpful for you. So, again, she talked about this new concept in her mind as grit. I don't necessarily feel like it's a new concept. I do feel like, however, it has become a lost art or a lost characteristic, not to become societal about this, but I feel like there is a rampant lack of tenacity in America today. I really feel like we've lost that quality among us. And those members that are of the greatest generation, the ones that went through World War II, have that grit. They have that tenacity. And why do they have that? I think it's because they face some of the toughest adversity that they've ever seen, that probably this country has ever seen. Between the Great Depression and World War II, they faced that adversity. They turned and faced it and went after it and conquered it. So I would challenge Dr. Duckworth that we know how to develop grit. We know how to develop tenacity. It's developed by facing our adversities and conquering it. So we look at some of the things that we do, particularly at the academy, to develop that. One of the things they do is they make every cadet box. In fact, 2 years ago, in 2016, they started making all the women cadet box too. All the women cadets, that their thought process there was, if women are going to be in combat, they need to know how to take a punch in the face. They need to know how to be able to stand face to face with somebody else and strike at them and take those hits back and forth. So, speaking to the members, so first of all, I'll just start off and talk a little bit to the members about some of the things that I would impart on them or ask them to do to help develop grit in themselves. So, like I mentioned, you got to face your fears, okay? Grit is developed in the face of adversity. So, if you're in sports, if you're not in sports, I would recommend you get involved in some type of sport. When you're looking at developing grit, probably the best sports to be involved with are the combative sports. So about 1.5 years ago, my daughter came to me, and she's a little 5'2" girl. She's not very athletic, and she said, "Dad, I want to get involved in something. I want to learn how to defend myself, but I don't know, and I want to be involved in some sport. What should I do?" And I said, "Judo. Judo is a great sport for a little person. In fact, it was developed for little people. I'm great at judo, by the way, because I'm a little guy. So I was a wrestler, and so I've got that natural feel on the mat. But boxing or judo or jiu-jitsu, there are tons of places to get involved in jiu-jitsu, and as some of you members go off to college, you'll have opportunities for those classes. That is a great forum for learning how to develop grit. My son mentioned to me the other day, he wrestled freshman and sophomore year in high school, and he lost almost all of his matches. And he told me, because I was a wrestler in high school, I did okay, I wasn't great, but I was a wrestler in high school, so I encouraged him to participate in that sport. And he told me, he said, "You know, Dad, until I had wrestled, I had really never come across a sport that I wasn't good at. And I'm glad you told me to wrestle, because it really taught me some grit when it came to physical involvement in sports. And it's made him a better athlete on the football field, and so it's helped him out from that aspect of it." Your parents, FFA members, your parents are going to help push you to, especially if they're the people I think they're going to push you to develop grit. So remember to tell them that you love them, because that's hard as the parent, telling your child no, disciplining them. So make sure you let them know when you have that opportunity that you do still love them, even though they're disciplining you, okay? The other thing I would say is that remember that just because your parents and you disagree on something, that doesn't mean they don't love you. That's very difficult. And in fact, I see that a lot in the younger ages. We're starting to develop that in all levels of all age brackets of our society, but we're having a difficult time conversing when we have differences of opinion. I've seen a lot of relationships in the last 5 to 10 years that people have severed the relationships because they've had a difference of opinion, which doesn't make much sense. So, as an example, I'm Catholic, raising my children in the Catholic faith, and a year ago, my oldest two, were going through confirmation classes, and my oldest daughter came to me and said, Dad, I'm not Catholic. Okay. She was, well, you're not mad at me? No. Why would I be mad at you for telling me that? I'm proud of you for standing up for what you believe in. I mean, I would love for you to be Catholic, but if you don't feel this, if you don't want to be Catholic, then don't go through confirmation and say, I'm Catholic, because your dad is, asking you to do that. Do it for you, and do it. And so our relationship continues. She expected for our relationship to be damaged, severed, because of the fact that she doesn't want to be Catholic, and I've been trying to raise them as Catholics. I think it almost has strengthened our relationship because it gives us an opportunity to talk about faith, probably more so than my other kids, because we have a difference of opinion there. So when you have those differences of opinion, remember that it shouldn't sever the relationship at all. If you do it right, it can strengthen the relationship. And I see that a lot, and especially in the younger folks, where there's a difference of opinion and they just shut people off that have a different opinion. We should really be trying to seek those folks out and having an engaging conversation. And we tie that back to agriculture. We talk about that a lot in some of our seminars about how we need to be engaging with people who have a difference of opinion. We should go to those, PETA conferences. I don't know what they are, but go and listen. It doesn't mean you have to agree, but we should go and listen. And if they give us a chance to express our opinion, we should do so. With respect, we should do that and have that conversation, because the only way we're going to work through some of these issues is through the conversation. Okay, so those are the key things I've got for members. Last thing is, you're going to fail. Adversity leads to failure. Picking yourself back up, trying again, that leads to development of grit. So for you FFA members, be okay with failure. Not everybody gets a trophy. Okay, that's part of the world, and we're going to develop that. I think I see that pendulum swinging. Last decade or so, these contests have been where everybody walks away with a trophy, and I see that pendulum swinging the other way. In the real world, not everybody gets a trophy. So as you start getting into the higher levels of academia, whether you go to college or if you go out in the workforce, you're going to find out not everybody gets a trophy. Be okay with failure. Don't accept it. Don't say, well, I failed and that's okay. No, pick yourself back up, try to do better, but learn from that failure and develop grit. That's the only way you're going to develop it. In fact, one of the things that we see is that talent and grit almost have an inverse relationship with one another. Some of the most talented people have some of the least amount of grit because they've never failed. They've never been knocked to the floor. That's one of the most frustrating things for me, is to work with somebody who is so talented and they've got no tenacity. They've got no grit because they've never failed. It's really disheartening to come across somebody like that because they are so skilled. So sometimes those people that have extreme talents, it almost becomes to their detriment because they haven't developed that grit. So those are some comments for the members. For the parents, this is a difficult one, but we have to allow our children to fail. We have to. And the difficult part is trying to be okay with that and encouraging with them, but still allowing them to fail, right? One of the key things that I learned from my leadership coach, and I'll quote him on this, he said, never fix your children's problems with your money. Interesting comment. He added with your money at the end. Never fix your children's problems with your money. That bears saying 3 times. Never fix your children's problems with your money. So one of the things he recommended, and I think probably most of you do this already, one of the things he recommended was have your children do paying chores or have them work a job. So when they make a mistake, when they wreck their car or back into their friend and they need to go get it fixed, they pay for it out of their own pocket. Don't pay for that for them.
Whoops.
I know. That can be a difficult one. That can be a difficult one. Now, having said that, you gotta, it's not an absolute. There are no golden rules in all this, right? Parenting is a gray area, trying to adjust that. If you've got a child who is into sports and very active in FFA, that's almost like a job. So, you can adjust for that a little bit. But a lot of times, your children will make mistakes, and we try to fix it for them. Let them fix it themselves. Allow them to fail. Provide discipline and love. Okay? Discipline with love. So here's where the second concept, remember I talked about grit. So the second concept that I wanted to bring up was the blue chip theory of interaction management. And I learned this at West Point. So my tactical officer at West Point shared this with us. I've got the visual aid for those of you who can see this. Okay? So he told us that everybody starts with a half a cup of blue chips. Everybody starts with him with a half cup. Every time you screw up, you take some out. Okay? The idea is it never gets empty. Once it gets empty, you're in trouble. That was his idea. If you've spent all your chips, you're in trouble. Now, going through West Point, there were lots of ways to get in trouble. Fairly disciplined academy, right? I know the first day that we got there, they took us, this is in the first week. And the first week that we got there, they put us all in Eisenhower Hall. They had us all stand up, and they said, okay, everybody look to your left, look to your right, look at yourself. One of you three is not going to be here 4 years from now when you graduate. Okay, pretty tough. They were right. It's about a 30% dropout rate from the academy. Very tough place to get through. So one of the hurdles was to make sure that you kept some chips in that cup.
Because you gain chips back.
Right. So I'm getting to that part. You gotta gain chips back, right? Good straight man. Good straight man. Oh, yeah. So, right now that's it. So how do I translate this into? And I found this concept to be very, very helpful for me with my teenagers. Okay, because I'm a critical person. Sometimes I've been told I'm a perfectionist. Big surprise. Right? Okay, so I've got to make sure with my teenagers now this concept goes both ways, so teenagers pay attention as well, because this goes with your parents. But as a parent, you're dealing with somebody who is, forgive me for saying this, members, is somebody who doesn't have the experience. They might not have the maturity of those of us that are 40 or 50 years old, so we have to take the lead on this, right? So sometimes when you're dealing with teenagers, if that cup gets completely empty, you end up with the stomping out the room, slamming the doors, driving out the driveway, and you don't see them for half a day, or sometimes overnight, and they won't tell you where they're at. Anybody ever run into that? I have. I've taken too many deposits out of my cup and not put some back in her cup. Okay? So I'm not the perfect parent. Please, I'm not executing this all the time just right either. But this is something that's a key concept. So the other part of this is you don't need to have this overflowing. Okay? If their cup is overflowing all the time with chips, you're probably doing it wrong. The best way to do it, keep some in there. So how do we do this? We take chips out and we tell them they need to get their grades up. You need to clean your room. You need to be home by 11:30 tonight. Okay? How do we get chips back in there? Spending time with them. Going to a basketball game that she's participating in. Showing them love. Having a genuine conversation. Right? Anybody heard of the 5 love languages? They heard of the 5? So 5 love languages are intended for marriage, for a couple and marriage, but they work for really any loving relationship you've got. So if you're dealing with your teenagers, the 5 love languages are quality time, acts of service. See, I got to write these down here. physical touch, gifts, and words of affirmation. So my oldest daughter, who is not Catholic, one of her love languages, probably her strongest one, is physical touch. So just every once in a while, out of the blue, I'll walk up and I'll give her a hug. And we'll embrace. And it'll be like for 30 seconds, we'll just sit there and hold each other. Just a very loving father-daughter embrace. And it starts putting chips in her cup. So when I tell her she can only be out till 11:30, she's not happy. But I don't have that cup empty. And she shows up at 11:30 because we have that type of relationship. That makes sense? Okay. So that's the second big concept I want everybody to keep. You take chips out and you deposit chips back in. Every time, just make sure you're not overfilling it. There's no need to overfill it. In fact, if it's overflowing all the time, you've spoiled your child, right? If you're overly critical and you've drained it, you've just kind of ruined your relationship with your child. In fact, my leadership coach has this theory that once you've drained this out and it's gone to negative, you have to put, I think he says 5 back in for every one you can spend until you get back into positive territory. So for every one that you've overdrawn, you have to put 5 back in, okay? It's an interesting concept. So just make sure you don't overdraw that. So there are times with my kids that I will overlook things that I would normally correct them on because I know I'm getting very close to the bottom on this and I haven't made any deposits lately. So that's the second big concept. For the parents, make sure you're providing discipline. Make sure you're lovingly disciplining them. Just be careful not to overdraw on the emotional bank account. That's what Stephen Covey calls it, as the emotional bank account. So, in closing, I will say to the parents, it's very difficult to know the difference between helping and enabling. So be careful of that trap. Sometimes you go beyond helping and it becomes enabling. Personally, I really struggle with that line when you know you're crossing that, but that's for everybody to determine. So, again, to close up, I want to talk about grit, how important it is, how I'd like to impart on the members to continue to develop in themselves, to work hard, to face adversity, and conquer it, and be okay with failure, and bring yourself back up. Again, thank you for the time you've given me tonight. Appreciate the invitation, and good luck with the rest of your season.